Welcome back. We have a follow-up question today to last week's quilt math topic. It comes to us from Pam Peterson. She says, "Thank you for going over the quilting math. Your method is how I would do it and it makes sense to me. When I buy fabric for a specific pattern, I often round up to the next measurement to make sure I have enough fabric. This is my question for you. When you write your patterns, do you round up on the list of fabric requirements? For instance, on your demonstration example where you needed 2/3 yard, 24 inches, would you list 3/4 yard, 27 inches? As I have said, I often round up to buy because I am not sure how exact the designer lists the fabric requirements. I am a couple months behind on the mystery block of the month and I am loving this project. Thank you." This is a great question, Pam, and I thought I would just take some time to go over this question right now. Every pattern designer is going to write their patterns a little bit differently and allow for various amounts of overage in those fabric requirements. And we never know exactly, unless you've specifically asked that pattern writer, how they figure their quilt math. But there is a way that you can always check and see exactly how a designer has done their quilt math so that you know if you need to purchase additional fabric or not. And I thought that this would be a great follow-up little mini lesson for those of you who may have wondered this same question. I've printed out a copy of my beautifully charming pattern. This is a free pattern over on my blog. I'll link to it in the description box. Getting out my trusty calendar once more for today's lesson. We are going to talk about how you can know how much yardage extra, or maybe if it's exact, a pattern designer has allowed for. For myself, I do always round up and give extra yardages with my pattern writing so that you do have overages. But depending on what you might be wanting to use with your leftover fabric, or if you're a pre-washer, a starcher, a pre-starcher, you might decide that you want to have even more overage, or you might take a look at your fabric requirements and decide, hey, I do not need this much extra fabric, and you might actually opt to round down. So let's take a look at how to see exactly what we would need. All right, so for this pattern, we are going to use this 2 3/4 yard of the dark gray or the red fabric for this demonstration. So I'm just going to put a little tick mark there. This is the requirement that we are double checking, this 2 3 yards cut of fabric. Now we know that at least a portion of this fabric is for the sashing. You can see that here in the diagram. So this is going to be sashing fabric. And then we can also see, because of how everything is labeled here, that in addition to sashing, that same fabric is used in the blocks as well, because we see right here in the cutting instructions where it says from the gray/red fabric, we're cutting all of these pieces. So it's also being used here in the blocks. So we're figuring how much yardages are actually, how many inches are used in this portion of the quilt for the sashing, and then these little bits in the blocks. The first measurement we see here is 6 strips, cut 2 3/4 inch by width of fabric. So we're just going to multiply that out to see exactly how many inches that actually is. So 6 times 2.75, that gives us 16.5 inches we need for those B units that we cut here. The next measurement we see listed is 12 strips by 1.5 inches. So let's just multiply that out, 12 times 1.5 inches. That gives us 18 inches here. 8 strips by 2.5 inches. So we will multiply that out. We come up with 20 inches. Then we have 11 strips cut at 2.5 inches. We'll multiply that. We come up with 27.5. 4 strips by 2.5. And we come up with 10 inches. Now all we need to do is add these 5 totals together, and we're going to see exactly how many inches of fabric we will be using. So 16.5 plus 18 plus 20 plus 27.5 plus 10. That gives us 92 inches of fabric. So 92 inches. 2 yards of fabric is 72 inches. So let's just subtract the 72 right off of that. So we need 2 yards and 20 inches. 20 inches, to round up to the closest measurement for yardage, would be a 2/3 yard cut, which would give us 24 inches of fabric. You can see here that this is 3/4, which is 27 inches. So this is giving us 2 yards and 27 inches of fabric. We will actually be using 2 yards and 20 inches of fabric. So we know that we have 7 inches of additional fabric when we purchase 2 3/4 yard. So that will allow you to determine, is 7 inches of overage enough for you? That certainly allows for pre-starching, pre-washing. It gives you a little bit of wiggle room if you miscut something, but maybe you prefer to have just a little bit of extra wiggle room, or maybe you want to be able to add to your scraps as soon as you're done making this project. So you might even opt to round that up to 3 yards. On the flip side, you might see, oh, I only need 2 yards and 20 inches of actual fabric. I would prefer to get as close to that as possible, so I am going to purchase 2 2/3 yards, so I only have 4 extra inches of fabric. There are different ways that you might be interested in approaching that, but that tells you how to figure the math to determine what is going to work best for you. You can work your way down through the pattern, double checking the yardages for every single cut of fabric that is utilized in the pattern. One thing that I would suggest you do also is just double check and make sure that there is no additional cutting being done in the piecing of the pattern. Sometimes that does happen where the majority of the cutting is done here, but then they might have you cut something a little bit later in the pattern. So double check that to make sure that you're not actually needing to cut anything further in the pattern. That is just a quick little secondary math lesson to last week's math topic. If you missed that video, I was talking about figuring out yardages if you want to make a quilt smaller or larger than what the pattern is set up for. So if that's something you might find helpful that you missed, be sure to check out last week's video. So thank you, Pam, for that question. I thought that was just a really nice additional topic to go over in reference to quilt math. Next up, we have viewer quilt shares. You're probably also getting an idea of what the remainder of our video is going to be about. After I share these viewer quilts, it's going to be a flannel Q&A video where I'm going to be answering a lot of the questions that I received in regard to my Sherbet Sunshine Flannel fabric line, which is shipping and arriving into quilt shops right now. So let's talk about these viewer quilts first, and then we're going to answer some flannel questions. First up, from Stacy Z. She says, "Hi Cori, I wanted to share with you and your viewers this cute zippy pouch that I made using your Sundrops fabric. I created this bright and cheerful mini charm pouch, which is perfect for spring. The sunny vibes of this fabric are perfect for the upcoming spring season. I love making them. The zippy pouch pattern is designed by Camille Roskeli of Thimble Blossoms. They are so fun to put together. It's a free pattern by Moda. I enjoy watching your YouTube channel, especially the viewer quilt segment. It's always such a joy to see the beautiful creations of our quilting community. I am Stacy So on Instagram if you want to take a peek at all of the fun projects I've made or our works in progress. Happy quilting." Thank you so much for sending that cute little zippy pouch picture. I remember seeing that pattern. It's been a little bit, and thinking how adorable it was. I'm going to see if I can link to that pattern, if it's still a free pattern, if it's still available, link to it so that you have that pattern if you want to make one of those pouches yourself. From Lorraine C. "Hi there, Cori. I wanted to thank you for the fabric line that created the first quilt for my soon-to-be first grandchild. My daughter loves yellow, sunflowers, and everything dogs. When watching one of your YouTube videos, your sun-washed gingham fabric was featured. I knew when I saw it that was the perfect fabric for me to begin creating a quilt for my new granddaughter. I ended up finding it on Etsy. I purchased your complete sun-washed line with a significant amount of yardage of the yellow gingham. With the leftovers, I made a bonus quilt for the rocking chair that will be in her room. With the help of the whole country caboodle designs, I was able to create the perfect quilt. Thank you so much for the sun-washed fabric line. Keep creating." And Lorraine has sent in just a bunch of quilts, and also I think these little dogs, that picture there is her inspiration for the pillow, and that turned out so cute and just perfect and sun-washed. So what a wonderful project. Thank you, Lorraine, for sending that in. If you would like to have your quilts made using any of my fabric lines or featuring my patterns, you are welcome to send those in to have those featured here on the channel. The email address to send them to is linked in the description box below. All right, now we are just going to move into flannel. I have a bunch of flannel questions. You guys have been sending these in for me over the last several months, so I'm going to see what I can do to answer them. This is Sherbet Sunshine Flannel. It is my first flannel line, and it is in quilt shops now and arriving into quilt shops now, and so it's the perfect time to talk about it. This palette is so perfectly summery. It's the perfect time for it to be coming out. I've designed several projects for this fabric line. I might just hold up this Barnstar quilt real quick, but I don't know if I'm going to. Maybe at points in this video, I will be showing the other quilts there. I have a trunk show where I showed all of them, so I'll make sure and link to that. But this is the Barnstar that I designed for this collection. It uses a charm pack. It's 40 inches square. And we'll just lay this on the table here as I work my way down through these questions. Now, I do want to say, I am by no means a flannel professional. I am going to tell you how I made my projects. I'll do my best to answer your questions, but there are certainly people that work with flannel a lot more than I do that are probably going to give you different, maybe even better advice than what I'm going to give you today. But I did want to just give my thoughts on your questions and do my best to answer them for you. First up, we have from Holly Press Fibers. Thank you for such a comprehensive tutorial. I think this came in last week, so I think it was in reference to the math portion of that video. With your upcoming flannel collection coming to stores soon, do you by chance have a favorite pajama pattern, or could your viewers give suggestions? I don't. I don't have a favorite pajama pattern at all. And so here's where I'm hoping that we can crowdsource an answer for her. If you have a favorite pattern, leave that in the comments below so that hopefully we'll have some good suggestions for Holly. From Kelly Bowl, she says, what is the flannel group called? I'm sure she said it, but I missed it. It's Sherbet Sunshine Flannels. Just a whole palette of beautiful sherbety, soft colors in the prettiest, softest flannels. From J. Fred E, she says, are these no-pill flannels? I haven't washed any of these quilts yet, and they certainly haven't gotten a lot of wash, so I can't say with any certainty, yes, they're going to pill, or no, they're just really not going to pill. Lisa Bonjean designs a lot of flannel fabric lines for Moda. She designs Lisa Bonjean of Primitive Gathering, so you might be really familiar with her. When I think about flannel and who I know that uses lots of flannel, she's always the first person to pop into my mind. So if you've used any of her flannel fabric lines, that would be a good idea of how these are going to wear for you. These are quilt shop quality flannels. There is a difference in flannels, just like there is in quilting cottons. So my hope would be that with quality quilt shop flannels, they would wash and wear nicely for you. But again, I haven't washed any of these quilts to be able to give you exact advice on this. From XG Garbled. What needle size to use for piecing with flannel? Can you starch flannel? I normally starch my fabric for piecing. If I use the flannel as backing and the front quilt is starched quilting cotton, will that affect shrinking? Do you still use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, or do you take a larger seam allowance when piecing with flannel? Will it pill with frequent repeated washing? Well, we've covered that last question. Let's start at the top for all of the others. What needle size to use for piecing with flannel? I kept my same needle in my machine. I often have a 90-14. 80-12 is also a common needle size to use for piecing, and I just left things the same as what I currently had it on my machine. Can you starch flannel? You can. Flannel does shrink more than quilting cotton, so keep that in mind. Now, with pre-cuts specifically, but this also goes for quilting cottons, it's often not recommended to starch pre-cuts, especially if you need the whole pre-cut, because then you won't have enough fabric. The same holds true for quilting cotton. But yes, you can starch flannel. If I use the flannel as backing and the front of the quilt is starched quilting cotton, will that affect shrinking? If you are starching your quilting cottons, I would also recommend that you starch your flannel. They do have different shrink rates, and you want things to work in conjunction together. Do you still use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, or do you take a larger seam allowance when piecing with flannel? For all of my projects, I did maintain my 1/4 inch seam allowance. I have also heard advice that you can go up to a 1/2 inch. Of course, that's going to depend on what you're piecing. So just something to keep in mind. You might want to look into that a little bit more. My patterns will say what seam allowance would have been used to piece with. But if you're working with someone else's pattern, you might be told to stitch at a different seam allowance. And that's those questions. Again, I am not a professional on working with flannels, so it's going to be great for you to source other people who sew with lots of flannels, people who have sewn with them more than me. I'm only speaking from my own personal experience. From Kathleen C. Question, I would love to make your around town quilt with your flannel line. I adore those colors. Any suggestions how to make it queen size without adding borders? Would I just add another trip around with some of the fabrics or maybe change the size of the squares to larger? Thank you. So she is referencing this quilt right here. This is around town. Let's hold that one up so you can see it. All of these patterns are in my Etsy shop. Here she is. I have them in both paper and PDF. This one was my absolute favorite one to piece. It was just so much fun. It was simple. It's just rectangles, super straightforward. No need to lay it out on a design wall because you could easily see where every piece needed to go. And I just loved piecing this one. It was just simple and fast, and I love this rainbow of color. So let's lay this here and talk about this pattern just a little bit to answer that question. Okay, stay on my table. And I'm just going to lay this here. Let me see if I have, what do I have in here? I'm going to lay this. I don't know if this back picture is going to be the most helpful way to show this or not, but we can talk about it here. So you can kind of see how this pattern is created. We start with a center square, and then we are doing different fabrics around that center, expanding out from the center. So you could certainly continue this pattern and go ahead and add more squares. You can see if you follow the pattern here, like take, we'll just look at this light purple color here. So this light purple color, if you wanted to add another row, you would put one of these light purple rectangles right up here at the top. You'd also have one over here at the side right here, one right here, and then one right here. Once you have that light purple square, it's this same fabric that you see here. We're just continuing the pattern out one extra row. Then you could come to this fabric right here. You're going to know that this fabric, you need to add one on either side of that light purple. You're going to do it on the sides and the bottoms, and you can just keep adding the fabrics that you need to enlarge it just like that. And then if you wanted to go bigger than that, go ahead and repeat that, and you can keep building it that way. You also asked about just making your pieces larger. Of course, you could absolutely do that. Just make everything larger. Since everything is the same size, just cut everything uniformly larger and enlarge your quilt that way. Either option works. You could even do a combination of the two. If you wanted to make the rectangles just a little bit bigger, but then also add additional rows, you could certainly do that. Next question comes from Nicole.CorianderQuilts. She says, I am thinking of using flannel as backing for a lap quilt. How does it wear? It is quality heavy flannel, but I'm concerned it will pill after multiple washings. So lots of concerns about the pilling with flannels, which sometimes we do run into flannel pilling. One way to test how a fabric is going to pill would be just to make a little mini project. Maybe you want to make a little pillow cover using charm packs, or even just throw some charm packs together and stitch it and throw it in the wash. Wash it hard, dry it hard, and see how it wears. And that's going to give you a little bit of an idea on how those fabrics are going to wear. But yes, there are differences in flannels. So if you've encountered pillings in other flannels, I can see why that would be something that you would be concerned about. I can tell you, I have worked with other flannels. I don't think I've ever done a quilt using all Moda flannels. I've always done scrappy flannels where I'm pulling from a lot of different manufacturers of flannels, and so I don't even think I have experience with using all Moda in a quilt. But I will say that the fabrics that I have purchased from quilt shops, the more higher quality flannels, have worn very well. I do have flannel quilts that are over 20 years old that have gotten washed and worn heavily, and they have held up very well. So I can tell you that. I just can't speak specifically for this flannel line itself without having tried it out. I'm not concerned that I'm going to run into any problems, but because I haven't tried it out personally, I don't want to give bad advice. Next question from Diane Gibson. She had a few questions and then she wrapped up with a question on flannel. Can you share any helpful hints in working with flannel, such as pressing? Do you press seams open or to the side, as flannel is so bulky? Stitch length, size of needle. Double thank you. My patterns have pressing instructions in them. I followed my pressing instructions the same way that I have them written in my patterns. I think everything is mostly pressed to the side because that is 100% the way that I prefer to piece, pressing to the side so that I can nest everything. Stitch length, I kept my stitch length the same as when I am working with quilting cottons. I did read a comment online that said you might find you like to lengthen your stitch length, but I did not. And then size of needle we talked about. From Anita Noland, what tips can you share about cutting, pressing, and sewing flannel? Do you need or use pinking shears? How hot can the iron setting be? Can you steam? Can you still use best press? Do you change the needle size or stitching length? So a few of these questions we have answered. I did not use pinking shears, just regular rotary cutting, cut it out. I approached it pretty much the same as I would sewing with quilting cottons. I didn't really make a lot of changes when I was sewing with flannel. I used the same heat setting on my iron, which I use it hot and I use steam, so I kept that the same. We talked about starching and needle size and stitch length. Tampa Bay Lisa says, is there a difference between quilting flannel and regular flannel? No doubt Moda flannels are high quality, but I'm wondering if I can make pajama pants with your new line when it comes out. Yeah, there's always going to be quality differences between quilting fabrics as opposed to something you might purchase elsewhere. That's not to say that something you purchase elsewhere couldn't hold up well and do well for you. It's just that the expectation would be that quilting quality fabrics are going to wash and wear nicely for you long term. Dorothy Schreier says, on the topic of pre-washing fabric, normally flannel is one I do pre-shrink, while your line from Moda need to be pre-shrunk. If you are a pre-shrinker, flannels do shrink more than quilting cottons, and it is often recommended that you do pre-shrink them, whether that's from pre-starching or pre-washing, especially I would say if you are mixing your fabric. So if you're mixing quilting cottons with flannels, you're going to want to make sure that you've pre-washed, pre-starched, one or the other, so that you have continuous, like everything is already shrunk before you start stitching with it. I have everything made with flannel. I didn't pre-wash. My front and my back is flannel. These projects are all going to shrink the first time I wash them. That is my expectation. Quilting flannels do shrink more than quilting cottons, so they are for sure going to shrink. So yeah, you can approach it the same way that you would. Again, we talked about pre-cuts. Keep that in mind. I don't necessarily recommend pre-shrinking pre-cuts. You're going to see that listed in patterns that include pre-cuts in the patterns because we don't want to lose size that we need for our pieces. And Deidre Powell, how do you use flannel? Front and back or with cotton? So you can see I've done front and back. You can also do half and half. You can mix. You just pay attention to making sure that you are pre-shrinking everything so that you don't end up with anything crazy happening that first time you wash it. I have never made a flannel quilt and am confused when to use it. Do you have to wash flannel first? So we've talked about those questions. If you have more questions or more advice than what I am giving about pre-washing, pre-starching, or maybe ways you approach things differently, feel free to leave that all in the comments. I've said it before and I'll say it again. We all do things differently, and just because I do something a certain way and my results are this does not mean that everybody's going to have the same result. I like certain tools, I like certain techniques, and they're going to vary from how everybody else does things. So if you have tips, tricks, and suggestions, go ahead and leave those down below. Stitchy Nancy says, Corey, I'm really excited to see your flannel collection. Can you use a cotton fabric along with flannel making a quilt top, or does it also need to be flannel? It's So we've talked about that. You can mix and match. Tori Munyon Quilter says, I really want to make the fat quarter flannel quilt. Do you recommend pre-washing the flannels? And if we do, will we have enough for the pattern? I think it's boxy. So again, this is a pre-cut pattern using fat quarters, and you are going to see right here on page 1 where I am talking about the cutting. I do not recommend pre-starching or pre-washing the fat quarters. You don't want to run out of fabric when you are making that project. And then with that being said, the first time that you wash your projects, when you don't pre-wash or pre-starch, you do want to make sure that you are throwing in some of those Shout color catchers to pick up any loose dyes. Because whenever we have projects that aren't pre-washed or pre-starched, you know that that first wash can be a little bit tricky. So make sure that you're throwing in your color catchers to pick up any loose dyes that there may be in the fabrics. Cheryl Graham says, Cori, I have been afraid to try the flannel lines because of a lack of experience working with them. Could you answer a couple of questions? Number 1, I almost always find that starching improves my piecing, and I don't think starching would work flannels. Do you starch? Would you starch? And if not, how loose is the flannel weave compared to regular cotton? You can starch if you want to starch. I approached it very much the same as I do quilting cottons. I'm not a starcher on quilting cottons, so I did not pre-starch my flannels. I see that most of the block seams on the sherbet flannel pattern are square corners and blocks. Just how tricky was that windmill center with 8 points using flannel in the panache pattern? So let's look at panache. That's this quilt right here. The way this was pieced, it wasn't a tricky quilt to piece. It doesn't come together the way that you think that it would, and it was simple to piece. And I did purposely keep the pattern simple for these flannels. You're going to see here too, we have points coming together right here, but there are other sections where points do not come together. So sometimes they do. You can see how my points come together in here, and sometimes they don't. But it wasn't a tricky one to piece at all. Next up, Linda Blundy. Your flannel fabric is so pretty. I have never worked with flannel. Do you have any tips? Do we need to buy extra for shrinkage? Thanks, love your fabrics and patterns. So at the very beginning of this video, we kind of talked about how to work your way through a pattern to see exactly how much extra you have in those yardage requirements. So you can always double check and see if you think you might need to have a little bit of extra fabric for shrinkage. Flannel fabrics do shrink more than quilting cotton, so keep that in mind. MHY. In the flannel collection, there are several checks and squares, which brings to mind my frequent dilemma. These are never straight on the fabric. How do you cut stripes and squares designs to show straight? With flannels and with woven fabrics, I don't as often worry about those stripes and checks. I'm not sure why this is. I don't know if it bothers me less when things aren't quite as straight in those fabrics, or what. With quilting cottons, I tend to straighten everything up. Checks, stripes, everything gets straightened. But I don't find myself worrying about it as much in wovens and then again in flannels. So you can straighten up. You can see how things worked out here. They look mostly straight, but probably you can find ones that don't look as straight. If it's something that I can straighten up, I will. But if it's not, I just let it be how it is. And this is how it turns out. But yeah, flannels and then, you know, those wovens that we work with do tend to have a lot of stripes and checks and plaids. And sometimes it can be bothersome if things aren't running exactly straight. But you can see how things are running here. Straighten, and that's kind of how I'll do straighten if I can, but sometimes you just can't. You might not have enough fabric, you might be working with a pre-cut, and you can't quite straighten it, but that's my rule of thumb. I don't worry about it as much for something here. I will if I can, but let it be how it is. We had another question about shrinkage on pre-cuts, which we've talked about. That came from Franny Donahue. And then also from Stephanie McInturf, she's also asking about shrinkage. Did you use any batting with these quilts? So that's also from Stephanie. Yes, I use just a lightweight, low loft batting, same as what I use on my quilting cottons. You don't have to. I have also made flannel quilt not using any batting, just the top and the back, and that has been nice. I feel like I remember reading a comment one time where someone used just a sheet, so they wanted something lightweight, but they did want a little bit of something in there, so they used flannel fabrics for the front and back, and then a sheet as their batting layer. Again, make sure that you are pre-washing everything if you're mixing things like that, so that you don't run into any strange shrink rates, but you could do something like that if you wanted to. That's the last one. Okay, well, there was only one quilt I didn't show up, and that was this guy right here. This is boxy, so I'll just go ahead and hold this one up yet, since he's the only one left to show. And then if, as you've been watching this video, you've come up with some questions, or maybe you feel like I didn't explain something very well, and you want to add comments or have further questions, just leave those down below. And I'm going to say it again, I am not a professional flannel user. I can only speak from my own personal experience. So there are people, Lisa Bonjean, for example, she's just a wealth of information about using flannels. She's done a number of videos about using flannels, starching flannels, all of her thoughts on flannels. So she is one person that I can definitely recommend. She's going to have great advice for you. She is a fellow YouTuber, so she's got videos out there that you can watch about using flannels. And if you really want I'm going to call her a professional, because I believe that she is a professional flannel user, she would be a great one to check out. She's just got so much good information about using them because she uses them a lot. She does a lot of flannel collections, and she's just going to be a good one to go to for your flannel questions. I've done the best that I could based on my limited experience working with flannels. I really did enjoy working with them. I thought they were a lot of fun. I really like this palette. I think it's a little bit fun, a little bit different than what we see in flannel collections sometimes. And it's made such cozy quilts that I'm looking forward to using. So there we go, Sherbet Sunshine Flannels in quilt shops now. Leave me any more questions that you might have. I can do my very best, limited ability to answer your questions, but I'll do my best to answer those for you. So thank you so much for stopping by. I will catch you again next time.